All right, everyone, thank you so much for being here and welcome to tonight's Out of the Archives presentation. My name is Joan Ilacqua and I'm the Executive Director of the History Project. And for those of you who aren't familiar, we are Boston's LGBTQ+ community archives. We're a volunteer-driven organization dedicated to documenting, preserving, and sharing LGBTQ history in Greater Boston, statewide in Massachusetts, and then regionally here in New England. Tonight's presentation, or tonight's sort of panel and discussion, Creating Space, Queer Women Publishing in Bookstores, was supported in part by the Mass Humanities Bridge Street Fund. So thank you to Mass Humanities for your support, and thank you all for your support in being here tonight. I have two other events to plug before I tell you about our speakers. First, next week, the History Project is having its second book club meeting next Thursday. So you still have time to read Franny, Queen of Provincetown, and come together and discuss it informally with a little group. And then 2 weeks from now, we're doing a conversation about Boston Pride, historic commemoration and controversy. And so info about that is up on our website. And I'll put some links in the chat as well. And I will say the History Project, like I said, is a volunteer-driven organization, and so we appreciate any support that you can give us. I'll put a donation link in the chat. Any support helps us to put on programs like this, to help to preserve the archives, and to share this history with the community. So for tonight's event, we're going to have 4 speakers who will be participating, and then we're going to open up for sort of a community question and answer and discussion. Especially since many of you in the audience have been involved with either publishing or bookstores or both, and we'd love to hear from you. So going in alphabetical order, one of our speakers tonight is Christina Pascucci Ciampa. And Christina, I realize I didn't ask you how to pronounce your last name, so was that?
It's Ciampa, but it's fine. It's okay. Great. You got the Pascucci part. That's all that matters.
Thank you. Well, it's with a last name like Ilacqua. You can really creatively say last names very differently than how they're written. So Christina is the founder and owner of All She Wrote Books. All She Wrote Books is an intersectional, inclusive, feminist, and queer indie bookstore that supports, celebrates, and amplifies underrepresented voices through its thoughtfully curated selection of books spanning across all genres. Christina started All She Wrote Books by partnering with local businesses in Somerville, asking if she could bring a 3-shelf beige IKEA cart of new and used books written by these authors and set herself up in a small section of her stores, in their stores. In July of 2020, All She Wrote opened its brick and mortar location at Assembly Row in Somerville and will be celebrating its 2-year anniversary this July. Also on our panel tonight is Arielle Gray. Arielle is a Boston-based media journalist who uses journalism and graphic art to tell the stories of underserved voices. She's the co-founder of Print Ain't Dead, a bookstore and publishing platform focused on literary and text-based artifacts produced by Black, Brown, and Indigenous artists. We also have with us here tonight Kimm Topping. Kimm is an educator and writer with experience in nonprofit management, fundraising, and communications. Kimm's work values youth voice and leadership, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and trauma-informed education. Kimm also has a book coming out soon called Generation Queer that you should all go check out. And then we have Cierra. Cierra Michele Peters is a Boston-based artist whose practice includes video, sound, and durational performance. She works as an artist, DJ, and organizer with projects that attempt to examine visual, spatial, and sensory representations of Blackness. She's the co-founder of Print Ain't Dead. Thank you all so much for being here on this panel tonight. I will turn it over to our first speaker, Kimm.
Thanks, Joan. Hi, everyone. It's really good to see so many familiar faces, and I'm so honored to be with incredible people on the panel tonight. Again, my name is Kimm. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I am an educator and youth worker and community organizer with a lot of my work really focused in queer and trans liberation. And I wanted to just share a little bit about, before diving into some of the groups that I want to talk about tonight, just share a little bit about my identities and positionality, just to share with you all where I'm coming from. So I am a white, queer, trans, disabled, first-generation college student, as I said, youth worker and community organizer. And all of those things really impact how I do the work that I do. And I've lived in Massachusetts my entire life and went through the school systems here in Massachusetts. And much of that learning was incredibly whitewashed and patriarchal and completely silent around LGBTQ communities and people. And so all of that really informs how I have learned about all the topics that we're talking about tonight and continue to unlearn, and has really shown up in research, especially at looking in the archives and trying to find stories to uncover and share and really highlight. So I just wanted to start there and name that. And I'm going to share my screen. So I have some visuals I want to share with you all tonight. So first of all, just as a practice, starting every space with a land acknowledgement, and tonight especially we're focused on a lot of physical spaces because we're talking about bookstores. So I wanted to share this land acknowledgement. In Boston, we acknowledge the Pawtucket and Massachusetts tribes, First Nations people. We also acknowledge African ancestors' forced migration to this land and their presence in the building of this nation. And of course, with land acknowledgements should always come reparations and mutual aid, as well, as we're all engaging in that work. And this website, native-land.ca, is one resource that you can check out, can learn more about the land that you're currently occupying. And they also have lots of great teachers' guides and resources that I often use in youth spaces. So I'd encourage folks to check that out. So tonight I wanted to talk about a project that I've been working on for several years called Mapping Feminist Cambridge, which is a project that came out of the Cambridge Women's Commission and was very much inspired by Gilda Bruckman, who's here tonight. I'm so glad Gilda is here, who's one of the founders of New Words Bookstore. And the focus of the project was to highlight feminist histories from the 1970s to the 1990s. And of course, those feminist histories were also intertwined with so many movements for justice around racial equity, economic justice, housing justice, abortion access, health access, so many different things that were overlapping at the time, that kind of feminist in practice, but also other movements for liberation that were all coming together to create these collective and radical spaces. So that's really the focus of these tours. There's two different tours, one of Inman Square and one of Central Square in Cambridge, focused on the 70s through the 90s. And this came from spending a lot of hours in the archives and also interviewing a lot of incredible people who were organizers during this time. So here's one of the maps. This is from Inman Square. So as I mentioned, it's very location based. So we focused on spaces and what happened in those spaces, and then highlighted some of the collectives and the organizations that were formed in those spaces. So this is Hampshire Street in Inman Square. And there was really a collection of different feminist organizations that emerged at the time. And after I'm done speaking, I'll put the links in the chat for all of these tours so you can check them out. Apologies that it's a little blurry on the screen, but you'll get the full copy after I'm finished speaking. So the first group I wanted to highlight, and I know there are folks on the call who can speak to this even better than I can, is New Words Bookstore, which I know also inspired Christina's bookstore. I'm sure she'll talk about that. So New Words Bookstore was housed at 186 Hampshire Street, which was also really a hub for so many other radical groups and collectives, like a counseling group, one of the earliest graduate programs in feminist studies, which was foundational to so much of what we know now as women, gender, and sexuality studies, and other groups as well that emerged in that space at 186 Hampshire Street. So New Words was started with a group of people coming together and pooling resources to found the bookstore. And it was central to what was called the Women in Print cultural revolution and movement. And that, that involved books, but also newspapers and journals and newsletters and so many different forms of written communication that people were using to communicate their work around liberation and connect with each other and build community together. So New Words was really a home for so much of that organizing in Cambridge, but also nationally, because there were so many connections happening with other bookstores and the women in print movement more broadly. And one of the connections that is somewhat related to New Words Bookstore is that New Words hosted a lot of readings for authors, and some of those authors were connected with Kitchen Table Women of Color Press, which was a publication that was led by Black feminists, particularly from the Combahee River Collective, including Barbara Smith. Barbara Smith founded Kitchen Table Women of Color Press, and she was one of the authors of the Combahee River Collective Statement, which of course is a foundational Black feminist text, and also so much for us to learn about how that also informed all of the organizing happening in Boston at the time and currently. So I can share a link to that in the chat as well. And so Barbara Smith formed Women of Color Press, and that published books exclusively by women of color, including people like Audre Lorde and Angela Davis. And Barbara Smith also had connections with New Words, was a regular visitor there, and was also involved with some of the other organizations in Cambridge, like Transition House, one of the early domestic violence prevention and response programs. And she trained staff there on anti-racism. I wanted to share just a connection to the present. Of course, I'm sure we all understand the need for a women of color press, but this continues to be really relevant to the publishing industry today. And this is from Lee and Low does a diversity in publishing survey to understand what publishing looks like. This is from 2015. There might be a more recent one that I can check out and share with you all, but essentially, finds that most of the publications are coming from white, straight, non-disabled, cis women. And so there continues to be so much work that we need to do around publishing opportunities, mentorship, fellowships, writing training, all of the things connected to publishing that I know other people are going to talk about tonight. And then the last thing I wanted to say, just from the historical perspective, again, was just to emphasize that, of course, books were an incredibly important part of the work that was happening, but also other written forms of communication. So things like bulletin boards and streetlight poles, where people would post posters and newsletters and create phone trees and just ways of connecting with each other and building, was another really important form of communication. And I also wanted to just highlight a couple other bookstores that I didn't learn a whole lot about, but that many people mentioned during interviews. So 100 Flowers was one of them. And then the Red Bookstore, which I believe was the original name of the Lucy Parsons Center, which still exists in Jamaica Plain. And I think they have some history around that on their website. But if anyone knows more about either of those bookstores or other bookstores that we haven't mentioned, would love to hear from you all about that. And then as a way of closing, I just wanted to share some things that are happening currently. So several of us in the Boston area have organized a queer and trans writing group, and this is a space for queer and trans writers of all genres, all experience levels. It's trying to kind of undo the culture around writing spaces being hyper-focused on critique, and it's really just a more casual space for us to get together, connect with one another, get to know each other and the projects that we're working on, encourage each other. So it's a very low pressure space. And this is open to any queer and trans folks anywhere now that we're fully virtual. It was originally just in Boston, but now we've expanded that. So I wanted to extend the invitation for you all to join us for that. And as Joan mentioned earlier, I am working on a book called Generation Queer, which is a collection of 30 illustrated biographies of queer and trans youth leaders who are currently doing work in arts, education, and community organizing. And I'm really excited to be highlighting, uplifting their stories and the work that they're doing. And this is my info. If you'd like to reach out anytime, my email and social media, I would love to connect with you all. And that's it for me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing, Kim. And I put a bunch of links in the chat, and I want people to take a look at, too. Arielle put a PDF version of the Combahee River Collective Statement that was designed as a zine as part of the, what was it called? Reinvigorating.
Radical call.
Yes, it was like Black feminisms in Boston. And anyway, it's really great. We have a paper copy in the archives, but you can download your own as well. And yeah, and I'd like to turn over the floor to Arielle and Cierra now.
See, you want me to, I can share my screen.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much, Ari. But thank you all for having us. We're super grateful to be in the space. Again, my name is Cierra Peters, she, they pronouns. Ari, should we just start by talking, or how should we?
Yeah, okay. I need to get, this doesn't look like it's doing what I wanted it to do. Can everybody see?
Yes. Yep.
I'm gonna start back up at the top of art, sorry. Okay. Here we go. Awesome. Hi everyone, my name is Arielle. Along with Cierra, we run Print Ain't Dead, and my pronouns are she, hers. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm like, technology is tricky. So Print Ain't Dead, as stated before, is a bookstore and publishing platform that's really focused on BIPOC artists. We try to be really expansive about how we think about print work and what it means to be engaging with literary texts. We founded Print Ain't Dead in July of 2018 as a response to the lack of bookstores in the following zip codes, which denote Hyde Park, Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan. I don't know. I think that, yeah, when we were kind of first embarking on this, we were lucky enough to get a grant from DS4SI to produce our first pop-up. In Roxbury, there's one bookstore. If you want to visit a bookstore, you kind of have to go to Brookline Booksmith. You have to, get on a bus or a train, travel really far. And we didn't like that was happening. And outside of that, books are really expensive. So we were just selling books for like between $2 and $5 at first. New and used books, to really kind of emphasize that price should not be a barrier to books and literacy. I think one thing that I like to say often is that, like, I don't really think that Print Ain't Dead should exist. And I really think that Print Ain't Dead is kind of a critique on the publishing industry, as a critique on kind of like the dominant capitalist paradigm that says that, like, you have to do things a certain way. And so we saw an absence, and we kind of sought in our own way to fill a gap through books, through pop-ups, through vending, through workshops. We really start to fill a gap between kind of academic and capitalist spaces and our third sector, which is different, which is different. I don't know, Ari, you want to say something about this?
I'm trying to figure out this presentation. But I think you perfectly summed up everything that it is that we stand for. And yeah, at first we were mainly focused on selling predominantly used books. We had some folks donate, like Brookline Booksmith ended up donating some books to us, some titles. But a lot of it was us curating titles by folks of color, specifically trying to focus on queer and trans folks of color to add to our library for people to get at really accessible prices. That in our search, though, we found like a lot of other cool archival items, like old Black magazines. Like we have one in our space that's like a 1960 cover with like Dorothy Dandridge on the cover. So we've come across some like really cool archival objects as well. I do want to point out also, we were able to, let me see if I can bring this up. In some of our research, we were able to utilize the history project, where we came across these original pamphlets that the Combahee River Collective circulated when they really started to form and march here in Boston in response to the deaths of Black women in Roxbury and Dorchester. And I think this was also like a big jumping off point for us too, was this idea of being able to print and disseminate information in ways that were digestible to our communities. So these were great to come across in the History Project. I encourage everybody, if you can, and when you guys, I'm not sure if you guys are reopened, but to go and see some of these pamphlets in person. It's just cool how like these little paper pamphlets have survived and persisted over time, and more than that have led to, you know, this really kind of like foundational document and movement for Black feminists in particular. So
word, yeah. And I think that we cannot, you know, state enough like our roots, which like maybe we'll get into later, but like really inspired by the Kitchen Table Press, really inspired by the history and legacy of like feminist action and activism in Boston. But yeah, I guess we can just continue on. So I think one thing that's really important to talk about is that, you know, our context, right? Like we're both from Boston. You know, the United States is the only country to have legally prohibited Black people from learning how to read. And moreover, we find that in 1968, the FBI counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, actually instructed local offices to spy on Black bookstores. So there's no surprise as to why, you know, there aren't that many Black bookstores in the United States. Why, you know, it's definitely a targeted space because they see the revolutionary power of gathering around texts, lectures, literature. I think one thing that was always really funny to me, like during the uprisings in 2020, we were named as like a bookstore, one of the few bookstores, Black bookstores in the United States. And I'm really careful, and I think Ari, like together, we're really careful as to not overstate our work. This is like a critique, it's an art project. It is, you know, a bookstore, but we run it out of our studio. And so we're both movement workers and organizers, but we try not to overstate like what we're actually doing here. Yeah. Thank you, Ari. This is our first store. This was the place that we first did our initial pop-up. This was actually on Columbia Road in Dorchester. We got like, what was it, Ari? Like a $3,000 grant to do a pop-up in a bike shop for a month. And that's what we ended up doing.
And we brought so many books. People, yeah. It was really awesome to see people from our community come in and literally load up on books. Like people,
you had to set a limit.
Yeah, being able to buy 10 books at a time because they were so excessively priced, and good books too, used books, new books, in really good condition. And in addition to selling books, we also had some events where we featured artists of color, writers of color specifically. Here we had Portia Oliwola come. We had Priscilla.
We had Zhizha come and speak. Chloe Wong did one of our very first, you can see it on the right hand side, one of our very first zines was actually like a collaboration with Chloe, who read from her book, which the name is escaping me right now, but she read from a book that she published during her time at SMFA, which is recollections and stories about her family. And then, you know, we printed a little zine, and this was like our first publishing project. Yeah.
And here is where we are now. We literally have this little studio in Hyde Park that is meant to be an artist studio, but that we transformed into a space for books and other literary ephemera and artifacts that we feel are particularly important to, you know, why we do what we do. Let me see.
Photos of us at different pop-ups. This is Ari helping build the shelves for our studio.
And then some of the zines that we had printed, which were like reproductions. So Cierra had created and reprinted this beautiful essay by June Jordan, Many Rivers to Cross. Again, just reformatting some of these things that you can find online into something physical and tangible that people can have and keep with them and put into their archive, their personal archive.
Mm-hmm. And then another thing to shout out really quickly is this Church of Black Feminist Thought, which you see on the left, foregrounded by Ari's very generous handmade keychains. We were trying all different ways to fundraise for this project in the very beginning because it was really scrappy and we were doing it on our own. So yeah. This was a dinner that we produced when we first opened up our studio to the public. Again, this is two friends of ours, Chloe Wong and Nia Holly, who cooked an amazing meal for us. And we would just find, this is, pre-COVID, so we were just trying to find different ways to get together and hang out and talk with our community.
Exactly. And this is kind of the space, what it looked like. Our first space, we've since moved into a different studio in the same building, but this was what our first space kind of looked like. Cierra, do you kind of want to talk about like the aesthetics of coziness?
Yes, absolutely.
Into spaces like this?
Yeah, and I think it's super important. I think, our spaces are heavily inspired by like coziness, lushness, the idea of the exotic or tropicality, and it's sort of paradoxical. Ari and I are both first generation 1.5 African American and Caribbean descent. And that really influences how we think about the aesthetics of our space. And again, like the critique, what we're trying to do here is create a space of comfort within conversations about really hard, heavy topics. I don't think that it's, when you read Many Rivers to Cross, you're talking about, the relationship between a mother and a daughter and death, and, what it means to not necessarily get along or feel connected to your parents. And so like when we're having these conversations about particularly Black women's text, Black feminist text, but anyone that is queer or of a marginalized identity, anyone that is Black and queer, et cetera, those are sometimes those can be really tough conversations. And so we tried really hard to make a beautiful, cozy, chill space that people felt invited into. Some of the sculptures by Ari.
Yeah, and then I think the second picture is a pop-up that we did at the ICA. Again, a major part of what we do is trying to bring our books to different parts of the community. And this particular night, we felt it was, a pretty diverse crowd, and we wanted to make sure that we had our offerings at the ICA as well.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to the next slide.
These are, again, us fundraising. Ari generously made a bunch of these bags for us, support writers of color, and also just reverence for our Black queer ancestors. Yeah, Ari, do you want to talk about this one? This one was also at the ICA. This was our first public installation.
Yeah, and this was obviously, I don't know if everybody can see the text here, but it says, "All water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was," by Toni Morrison. So Toni Morrison in particular has obviously impacted and influenced a lot of the work that we do. And we just thought that it was really poignant to have this quote here by the water. And this idea of rememory, which we feel is very interconnected with the idea of books, of press, the idea that rememory, it doesn't belong to one person. Memory is something that kind of takes on its own autonomy, especially when we're talking about Blackness and queerness and these other things of our marginalized identities. It becomes its own thing. And that's kind of what we were referencing here in this photo.
Yeah.
And I guess a lot as I'm going through these pictures, I guess it's important to note that a lot of what we do is not just about text. It's about using these other ways to engage with people. And this was actually a tribute kind of like ancestor homegoing that we did when Toni Morrison passed away. And we held this space basically for those who were impacted, who loved her, who were impacted by her life and death, to come and kind of hold space and reverence for her. We had my friend Lanice, who is an Ifa and voodoo priestess, come and lead us in some like ancestor reverence worship. And it was just like a really beautiful way to go beyond the words and the text, because so often the words and the text influence us, and more than just the book, right? So I'm just reminded of the importance of that as we're going through some of these photos.
And a lot of it is, you know, grounded in a Black feminist ethic of care. Like, it's not just about like the product, but it is also about the person. Some guiding statements for us here. I think, you know, there is no guarantee that we or our movements will survive long enough to become safely historical. We must document ourselves now. I think that, you know, this is why we have a press. This is why we do a lot of the excavation work, I'll call it, that we do when we're creating zines that are reprints of earlier texts.
Yes, and then as Kimm had already kind of pointed out, Kitchen Table Press was a press started here in Boston. And this quote from them is also like a guiding principle for us. Press is a revolutionary tool because it is one means of empowering society's most dispossessed people who also have the greatest potential for making change. And that's just another tenet that we tend to live by. Again, focusing on a lot of our small zines and things like that have just been focused on expanding the circle of access, being able to access these revolutionary tools and ideas and conversations.
Word. Black Feminist Study Hall. So this is one of our big projects. We started this with Giovanna Jones, Dr. Giovanna Jones now, who was doing the Black Studies Reading Room at the time. And it's really just an exploratory working group that is grounded in like writing, citation, conversation. You know, if you don't know, Ari and I are both Black feminists. And we believe that Black feminism is one of the most important theoretical tools that we have in the struggle for collective liberation. We started this in December 2019. You know, we've hosted 5 online gatherings, over 400 participants. And we really just like to keep it open and iterative and nimble, and just have spaces to read an essay or a text and come together to study it.
Also outside of academic spaces, which I think is really important. A lot of times people can feel, a lot of times there are silos created by academia in general, folks who may not have gone to college or completed college, or perhaps, you know, reading is not particularly their learning style. We wanted to come up with another way to engage with folks with this material in an area, in a space outside of kind of like this academic setting that a lot of times, you know, you find Black feminist texts kind of living in. And that was, I think, another really important aspect of us doing the Black Feminist Study Hall.
Yeah, definitely.
Another picture.
More pictures. Lectures ain't dead. This is like our first lecture. Excuse me.
And then these are more of our zines. These were some others that Cierra had printed. Cierra had done a residency in Rhode Island. I don't know if you're on the phone, Cierra, if you want to talk.
No, I'm not. No, it's Queer Archive.
Oh, okay, the Queer Archive. So yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about these?
I thought that I unmuted myself. So this was at Queer Archive Work. This was actually in 2020. So this was in the summer of 2020. I got an opportunity to do a residency, and we printed more books because that's what we do. And again, like, you know, really inspired by the idea of taking what's in the archive. Pirating is a really big thing for me and us. Stealing from the archive, stealing from the institution, really inspired by Fred Moten there. But yeah, so we created 2 readers and a couple zines. One reader, which was about Black labor studies, called Bitch Better Have My Money. The second one was about activist histories, however you wanted. That is Frantz Fanon on the cover. And yeah, what you'll also see here is some early, on the top, in the center, you also see an early print of our collaboration with an artist, Joan Petit-Frere. And this was really the process. Again, like, we're just two people who come together through study. So this is how real it is. I was just in there playing with printers, and it was really exciting for me. So I think we can move on.
And this was our most recent project. I promise we're almost done. I realize our presentation may have run a little bit long. And this was actually, on the left here, you can see the newspaper box. That's actually, those house the zines that I had just dropped in the chat. So the zine is a recreation. We hired a Black graphic artist named Zoe Pulley to redesign the Combahee River Collective statement in a way that was just like kind of like impactful graphically. And they actually fold out into kind of like this big poster. Just a really cool and different way to interact with a statement. We did, Cierra and I teamed up with Jen Mergel and Boston Center of the Arts to do Combahee's Radical Call. It was a very, very long year of public installations that we co-curated and obviously centered the history of Combahee River Collective. We also worked very, very closely with Demeter Frazier on this project, and we were guided a lot by her input, by the conversations that we had with her. She kind of just became our auntie throughout this whole thing, and just we just learned a ton from working with her. Mm-hmm. And we also had these posters up around Boston. On the right-hand side, you can see here with QR codes, so people could actually scan the QR code and then access an amazing online library that Cierra curated. I'm not sure if the library is still up.
Yeah, it's still up.
You can drop the link there, but from that library, you can find a ton of texts that we curated according to like theme and subject. So this was also our way of expanding access in our communities. So many people have a phone, so they could just scan the QR code and get whisked away to this huge, I don't know, just a wealth of information.
Yeah. And then the last thing I'll just say really quickly here is that obviously there's a rich history of like self-publishing in indie schools that we're in the lineage of, which is why we create all this. I think that we're always thinking about and engaging with these ideas of like circulation, curation, distribution, and queering bookmaking to rethink what the publication can do and should be. All right, you just skipped over your picture.
Oh yeah, these are just more of our banners again. So we had like prompts for practice. We had read Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who is an amazing queer Black feminist who everybody should be reading if you're not already. And again, just like trying to engage people with the text, with the work, and with these conversations. And again, like really kind of queering, the whole paper was queering what it means to be a sister. And going beyond its kind of like gender tied definition and acknowledging that anybody can take on the role of being a sister. And, we believe it's a gender neutral term, and it's a technology that really helps us to survive and navigate the world in which we live.
Yeah. I think that this is the end of our slide.
Long slideshow. Sorry, everyone. And I guess this is just a quote to end on. If you're free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. And we highly recommend following all of these folks. These are all folks that have really influenced us, or people have been in conversation with us throughout this whole process. A lot of these folks also either run their own presses or publish zines or other information. Oh my God. There we go. The Womanist Reader in particular has an amazing online collection of PDFs, of other materials, Black Feminist Study, Press. We're actually pictured here with the folks from Press, which is in Baltimore.
Yeah, and I think just one last thing that we should note is all this work is made possible by community and done with and for community. So we never try to make it seem like we're like doing this by ourselves, or that, you know, like we're again in a lineage of people who are both our contemporaries and our ancestors. So we really like to honor them whenever possible.
And that is our presentation.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for that. And as someone who's been following your social media for a long time, everyone should follow you. It's really amazing. And I did my best to put links in the chat, but for everyone who's here, I will send out an email with as many links as I can compile so that you'll have all of this information. But yeah, thank you both so much for that presentation and for sharing with us the work that you do. And then Christina, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I don't have a presentation, and I feel that that may not necessarily, I don't know, hopefully it'll be fine, but I feel a little unprepared at the moment because the presentations we've just seen, I just need to like just stop here and just say like the presentations we have just seen are absolutely amazing, and the wealth of community love and, you know, respect that I have for each and every single one of the folks that have just presented is huge. And you inspire me, so thank you. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Christina. I am the founder and owner of All She Wrote Books, which is the intersectional queer feminist bookstore located currently at Assembly Row in Somerville. But that's not how our journey started. So our journey, very similar to Arielle and Cierra, was a pop-up style, like popping up at different locations and places that would give us an opportunity to legit wheel in a 3-cart IKEA cart that I bought for $29.99 that I put together with queer, non-binary, and feminist text, all used to start because I had no idea about indie book selling. My previous career, I had worked in the private sector in marketing communications for 10 plus years. So for me, this was a whole new world, but I was an avid reader. I was definitely a person who's been writing for many years and been wanting to find a way to eventually tell her story. I'm a queer person. I am also a domestic abuse survivor. So stories in that vein don't necessarily get to see light at all very often, not even on the publishing level, self-publishing sometimes, but they're still far and few in between. And that was really one of the catapults for me, kind of doing this work with All She Wrote Books. The other piece of it was the fact that what drove me crazy, I was an avid, as a person who, I was able to, took me many years to eventually buy books that I could then put in a beautiful bookcase. But like, for me, it was I was going to all the different indie bookstores that we have in Boston. I say this all the time. I feel like sometimes we're very spoiled a little bit here in Boston with all of the indies that we have, and many of them are great. And we're very fortunate. But one of the things that kind of drove me nuts is the fact that if I wanted to find queer Black feminist text, or if I wanted to find queer, bisexual women, like just nonfiction, because I'm a nonfiction junkie by nature, I couldn't find it because it was literally either buried or non-existent in many of the shelves in many of these bookstores. And that to me was like, why? Like, I get it now from being in the industry a little longer, but it still was like, that makes no sense to me, because there are people that are looking for this. Why are you, almost kind of like not necessarily giving access to it or finding ways to provide access to it, right? So that to me was like the other part of this, of why like I wanted to start this. But I also, you know, very much similar to Arielle and Cierra, like bootstrapping it, right? Because there was no money to be had to start it. So that was how the concept started. And with the intention of eventually becoming a brick and mortar, so that way we could have a space to actually host events and authors and community building, etc. And we got that opportunity very early in 2020. This was before we knew there would be a thing called coronavirus. But the folks here at Assembly were kind enough to give us an opportunity to rent out a space that was unoccupied for 3.5 years. So we decided to take that on and take the risk. And then we weren't able to go into the space for 3.5 months after receiving keys. So that was fun. But then we finally were able to get in. And again, as Joan had mentioned in my quick bio, we opened in July of 2020, which many of you would probably be like, why would you do that? Why? Like, you're in the middle of a pandemic. Well, because I don't think anything like this should wait, whether it's a pandemic or not. Now, we were very cautious and very careful, you know, with folks that were coming into our store, because that was a really big priority for us. Like keeping people safe was a priority. And like, that meant like wearing like gloves and, you know, to hold the books, which is wild. But again, we did not know much. And that just kind of like started, you know, the conversations that we were having at that time, and just continued to start more conversations and more understanding about like different like books that were out there, aside from, you know, and I feel like the publishing industry most recently, and I think Kimm can speak to this a lot more, given kind of their experience, is the fact that publishing definitely has been putting out more queer books, but some of them are great and some of them could, you know, like I think kind of sit on one side of it, right? Whereas like there's an opportunity to really look at like, well, what has already been published and why are we not necessarily stocking that? Why are we not bringing that back? And with Print Ain't Dead, taking, you know, stealing that and making, you know, newer things out of that, and kind of like almost like, I don't want to call it rebirthing because that's not the right word, but it's almost like bringing it back up to the fold is like, that's the opportunity there. So, and that's, you know, bits and pieces of what we do here is like really try to find a way to do that. Another thing we're really big proponents of is community. And that includes making sure that we are constantly connected to as many communities as we can, especially the East Somerville community. That is where I live. Somerville in general, as many may know or that are on this call from being in the greater Boston area, is a very pricey city, and a very, I would say, economically pretty wealthy area, not like a Newton Wellesley situation, but something similar. And East Somerville is definitely one of the areas within the city that's not necessarily looked after. And there are many kids that go to those schools that can't afford to buy books. So one of the initiatives that we have done in connection with another nonprofit here in Somerville called Connection is build the Connection Collection. And this is an opportunity to get books to those kids, as well as queer kids within the community as well. So it's focused in on specifically highlighting BIPOC authors along with queer writers across all genres. And anyone can go and visit the library. So it's a beautiful opportunity for that. So there's many things, like I'm sorry that I may seem like I'm jumping everywhere, and I apologize. I'm just trying to formulate what makes sense, because I'm, like I said, I you know, I think the work that we do is extremely important, but sometimes I don't necessarily, we do so much, but I don't necessarily focus in on it all the time, right? Because it's just an automatic. And I think all of us on this panel tonight, that's just what we do. It's an automatic. We automatically do the things that we do because that's what we do. And that's what we fight for. That's what we get up to do every day. And that to me is why I'm having such a hard time kind of like figuring out the list of stuff we've done, because it's continuous. We're continuously doing it, but that's the reason why, we can't stop, right? Because there's so much going on right now that is, not great. I don't know how else to say it other than that. It's dark right now. It's a dark situation, but what we have to do is we don't stop because of that. And that's the thing about like places like New Words. I've had the amazing opportunity of meeting Gilda before we opened the brick and mortar. This is 2019. I met her at 1369 Coffee House in Inman. I think it's 1369. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it was I literally like fangirled, like absolute fangirl, because I had read about New Words in the book that Kristin Hogan, who I believe studied at the University of Toronto, but correct me if I'm wrong on that. The book is called The Feminist Bookstore Movement by Kristin Hogan. I highly recommend it for a book to read, especially if you want to understand feminist bookstore history in the United States. Because literally this is a coverage of all of it from starting in the early 70s all the way to early 2000s, when unfortunately many were not still around, unfortunately. But the thing with, the opportunity, the one thing I remember Gilda saying to me, and I know Gilda's on this call, but this is the one thing that has stuck with me for the last 3 years. And I just want to say again, thank you. You said to me that, what I'm doing, you have an entrepreneurial spirit that just is going to continue to evolve this in a beautiful way. And what we did at New Words is important, but you're evolving it to be forward thinking and continue that. And that to me stuck with me this entire time, because I was like, that's entrepreneurial spirit. Awesome. I don't know what that, at the time I was like, I don't know how to take that. I don't know what to do with that. But now after, doing this for the last 3 years, now I understand. And I'm so appreciative because New Words, I talk about it. I talk about their existence in this way, and all she wrote books. New Words paved the road for us to continue to build the road. The road may look different, but that's okay, because it aligns with where we are today and what we need to do today to continue having conversations like we're having this evening, protecting our queer and trans youth, continuing to fight for, the ability to control our own bodies, everything that we were fighting for before, which is wild that we're still doing it, but we're still doing it. And the thing is that that's why we're here doing that. So again, my biggest thing, and it's it's part of my personality, but also part of the space, is we protect everyone that comes in the space. Everyone that comes into the bookstore. I'm actually here right now, so that's why I'm motioning to here. This is the little cubby office that I created for myself. But this space is meant for anyone to walk through its doors, and I say this all the time, for anyone that walks through our doors to be able to feel safe, feel loved, and feel respected, no matter who they are, no matter what walk of life they come from. And that to me is extremely important. Accessibility is another thing that is extremely important to me. As someone who is neurodivergent, reading did not come to me very easily as a child. It took me many years to read, and to read at the level that, that I'm fortunate enough to do. And, that's really important to me. So part of the thing with our bookstore is to make sure that we stock enough books or different books that are at different reading levels for folks. The other thing we did was making sure that all of our shelves and getting around the store was easy for anyone that could not, that was not, you know, that either uses a wheelchair or uses any kind of device to move, because that to me is extremely important. It was actually, you know, it was a thought that I had for a long time, because I actually had an interaction with someone at a bookstore, I won't say where, but that couldn't actually move in the store. Their wheelchair, motorized wheelchair, got stuck on a shelf, and it was just it was an uncomfortable situation, and I couldn't move the shelf, and I felt really bad. But I also was like, that shouldn't necessarily happen to anyone, you know, period, end of story. And so, you know, for me, moving through our space is also really important as well. So, you know, we make sure that there's enough space for a wheelchair to fit through every piece of our store. And that's extremely important as well. I have some pictures pulled up of our bookstore if you want to see how pretty it looks. And I'm gonna probably end it there. And if there's questions about what we do, I can get into more specifics, but I apologize that there's no presentation or more formal statement, but, you know, I think the thing is that, you know, All She Wrote Books is consistently doing the work that, you know, we're doing, and we're going to continue that and partner with, you know, folks that are also doing the same work that we're doing as well, and continuing to support them as well in all the ways that we need to. And I feel like a bookstore like ours just needs to be there for the community and for folks that are doing the work on the ground. And that's really the kind of two big components here that I think about. So anyways, so a couple of things, a couple of images that I'd love to share with y'all. You know, when I talk about accessibility, I really, you know, that to me is extremely important. And one of the updates we've recently done is to actually make our website entirely accessible. So we actually worked on this project and it launched as of March of 2022. And what this does is this allows for accessibility adjustments on our website. The other adjustments we've made is we made sure there's alt text with every piece of text that is on our website currently live. In addition to that, any font sizes have been enlarged. And this is always going to be accessible to anyone that comes to our page. This to me was an extremely important piece to do, because if we're going to talk about, you know, if we're going to say that, you know, accessibility is a priority for us, we need to demonstrate that. So this is an example of like what, you know, putting our words, you know, into action piece. And then the other image I just wanted to share with you is the inside of the bookstore, which always looks dreamy. Again, this probably has a filter on it, but we've actually changed a few things in the store now. So if you do come, it's a little different, but ultimately, all of the furniture that you see here is actually refurbished furniture. It was left behind by the former tenant. So we repurposed all of it. And because it was a former children's clothing store, that's why the height accessibility pieces were able to do that. So this is just a shot of the back of this, from the back of the store facing out. And we also have, sorry, hold on one second. And then we also have, you know, some other things that we do. I feel like this is going to sound really cheesy, but my Instagram will tell a lot. So if you don't already follow us, we're All She Wrote Books, at All She Wrote Books. But one of the things that was really important for me was to make sure that we had a rainbow somewhere in the space. And so that is our children's area here. So this is the rainbow. This was done by a local artist by the name of Alex Mancini. if you don't know Crafty Queer Studio, I highly suggest that you take a look at them. They make beautiful pronoun pins and jewelry and accessories. Kimm also knows them as well, and they're a wonderful and amazing human. They make tons of stickers too recently, and we carry their stuff in the store. But they gifted us this beautiful paint rainbow piece in our store, which was absolutely amazing. And so that's just another shot of it. So it goes all the way around to the corner. And our children's section goes all the way from board book to young adult. And then we have a store pup. If you are a fan of corgis or just a bookstore pup in general, this is Ruby. Ruby came into my life about a month ago, and she's our pup for the bookstore. She's there all the time when I'm there. So if I'm there, she's there. So if you ever want to meet her in person, you are welcome to do that. And then, some other events that we've done. We've worked with organizations such as Speak Out Boston and hosted queer writers who have mostly self-published, with the exception, mostly self-published folks. And we hosted them a few weeks ago as well as some other self-published authors as well. And we try to support many of those folks as much as we can. I'm going to stop there because I feel like I don't know what our timing is. And I obviously want to make sure that this is a lively conversation and that folks feel like they can contribute. So I'm going to stop there. But if you have specific questions about the bookstore or about me in general, you can always contact me directly. I'm happy to actually put that in the chat if that is of interest to you, or if you would like to learn more. I will leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina. And thank you for the tour of the inside of your bookstore and for the dog pictures. I was going to say gratuitous. You weren't being gratuitous, but that's like the perk of having an animal in a store is to get lots of images of it hanging out. So thank you so much.
She poses really well. So.
And thank you to all of our speakers tonight. It's been really wonderful to hear about the work that you do, your influences, and I think that Christina mentioned this. We are in a really dark time right now. We've been in a dark time, but like in particular, I feel like the last couple of months have been particularly terrible, and especially around books and banning books and access to information and access to knowledge. So as we transition into this sort of question and answer and, group discussion part of things, I wanted to start with a question about that. Are you doing anything about giving access to banned books or to banned information? I would say Arielle and Cierra, I think I wrote in the chat, make stuff accessible, like take things from the archives and give them back to the public. I think that's amazing. And I think it's so important to do because there shouldn't be barriers to accessibility of knowledge and information. And like, that's part of why we're a community archives, is because we don't want to put up like that academic barrier wall there. So anyway, I'm getting off track because I'm excited. So that's my question. What do you think about these barriers and what do you do about them?
Does someone want to take that one first? Anybody?
I'm sorry, you said you're meaning just barriers in general to.
Yeah, it could be, you can answer it however you'd like. I apologize for I tend to ask like 3 questions at the same time and I should know better. But I think in this moment where people are trying to actively ban things like books in schools about queer topics. I live in Waltham now. We have what's called a queer little library. That's a free library and people keep going in and stealing the children's books out of it. Which is a weird thing anyway, because it's supposed to be free, but like one person will go and take 20 books. Yeah. And you know, what do we do, and what might you be doing? What do you think of that?
I will say, I think just from like personal experience, I remember growing up, The Bluest Eye being like one of like the most widely banned books. And I actually remember like our teacher assigning the book to us like in the 9th grade, and then all of these parents getting upset because of the content. And so I think just I don't know, I guess it's hard because there are multiple barriers to access, especially with banned books. You know, books aren't cheap to begin with, right? And obviously we're not pushing to pirate the work of authors who often need income to survive. But I think one of the things especially that we've done is like steal from a lot of these like institutions. Like I'm just now going back to school to get my bachelor's, and now I have access to JSTOR and all of these amazing academic papers on gender, on sexuality, on Blackness, on indigeneity. And so part of what we probably will do is, you know, find a way to source those and share them with our community. I know that the Womanist Reader also does that a lot, taking a lot of the work that she's come across in her, you know, in her, I guess, academic life, and scanning them and uploading them as PDFs for other people to read. So I think that at least for us, that's kind of been one of the methods that we've employed to make sure that things that are not necessarily banned, but that are behind a paywall, that people are able to access them.
Yeah, I definitely second that. I think liberating the knowledge is definitely one of the tenets of our work. And on the note of like JSTOR and other spaces like that, it's not like these authors or people that are publishing papers are even getting paid for that work often. Oftentimes when you're going to a conference or you're getting your work in one of these academic spaces, you might be paying or it might be for free. And so how we see our work with that is just as Ari said, you know, liberating the information, making sure that it's accessible to everyone, because, you know, is it really bad if you're stealing from a huge academic institution? Is it really bad if, you know, the academic institution that's holding the book used to own slaves and is now owning the papers of like a very particular Black academic or writer or artist who you admire? I think that those are some of like the questions around criminality that I think about, is like, who gets to decide what is criminal? Who gets to decide what is pirating? And so I think that's how I would answer that question, is just like, make it as widely available as possible. Spread it out. You know, if something, particularly for like younger students, if something isn't accessible or because it's banned or because it's behind a paywall, share it. Why not? I think that widespread popular information is one of the only ways that we kind of get to the other side.
So the banned book piece of this, from the indie book side, I mean, you see people making like, you know, displays of these banned books, and that's fine. I'm here for that. But I don't think that that's the way to answer that. The only way to answer that. I think, to like echoing Cierra and Ari's points of like, if that stuff is available, let's get it out to more people. And I think one of the other ways we can continue to do that too, whether it's, you know, taking banned books and making sure that they're in free libraries and continuously putting them in free libraries. A good example is the queer little library that Joan mentioned in Waltham. When they first had someone come and wipe out their entire library, which was unfortunate, we immediately sent them a box of books, no questions asked. And, you know, and these are books that are absolutely banned. in other places in the United States are being, kind of questioned about. And, I think the thing is like, if we are, I think we have to continue to make sure that we're in the communities that potentially are having these conversations and making sure that we find ways, because if, obviously I don't want to see these bans go through, but if that ever happens, that doesn't mean we don't stop sharing the information. That doesn't mean that we don't stop like continuously finding ways to connect or have connections with those groups of people that need to see themselves in the pages that are, either being issued digitally or in print, right? Like there's no reason why that should, stop, whether or not someone tells us that it has to stop or not. I guess that's like, I think that's like part of many of the movements that have happened previously and will continue that way. But I think that, as far as banned books are, we have to talk about them. And for those who want these books banned, especially books on racism, like you have to question, well, why? Is it because they're so uncomfortable with who they are, like that they have to, literally just be like, no, like we cannot have this because I just am uncomfortable, whether it's with my sexuality, with my race, whatever it is. And I understand that I'm probably unseating something that's a bigger problem, but I do think like, I don't think it ends like with that, And yeah, Cierra makes a great point. Getting active in the space and time, join the school boards. Yeah, no, 100%. Cierra, if you want to chime in on that, I want to make sure that you get a chance to say that, because I totally am here for that. That's exactly where I was going with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just read my comment out loud.
Yeah.
Get active if you have the space and time, join a community board, school board, or an organization that's working towards community power. I think a lot of these struggles are interconnected, and we have power, and the myth of liberal MA is not exempt from many of these conversations. So yeah, if you have the space and time, donate it, volunteer, and get active.
Yeah, I just put in the chat, WGBH just had an article on growing neo-Nazi movement in Massachusetts, and I've heard of issues in various towns in Western Mass, especially with school board elections and what is it called when you have a board of selectmen kind of things. So yeah, it's happening here. It's happening in New England. It's not just Alabama or Florida or Texas. So I wanted to open up the floor if anyone has a question or anyone, actually, we have several people who have been involved with publishing and bookstores throughout their lives and careers. And so if anyone wants to use the hand raise button if you can do it, and if you cannot and you want to turn on your camera and raise your hand, I can call on you. I just want to make sure that we have some time to hear from some folks. I'm trying to get better with being quiet until the people who want to raise their hand raise their hand. But eventually I crack. Okay, Jessica.
I'll ask my question. One, I really appreciated hearing everything from all of you. It was really interesting, really thoughtful, and great work that you all are doing. I was just thinking about kind of coming, I don't know, I'm thinking about what I know in terms of some of the histories of bookstores in the Canadian context and some of the issues that queer bookstores in particular have had about things getting past borders or not. And I was wondering if there's any, I mean, the US is a bigger publishing industry than Canada, and often things were coming from the US. But is there anything going on in the Boston context? Is there anything about sourcing that's challenging? Arielle and Cierra, you talked a lot about online sourcing and sourcing for things that are paywalled. Is there any international comparison to that, or ways in which bookstores right now and print enterprises right now are dealing with those kinds of issues? If that question makes sense.
Does anyone? I guess I mean, we work with, so we do purchase from both the big five, as well as the big five publishers in the United States. That's HarperCollins, Hachette, Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, and Penguin Random House. Penguin Random House being the largest. We also buy from smaller presses. Some of those presses are in Canada and abroad. So that can be somewhat challenging, but it's mostly comes down to a supply chain issue, because what's happening right now is because there's not enough printers in the United States. This is a big trickle effect, but ultimately, because there's not enough printers in the United States, you literally have to wait in line for your turn to print. So if you are like, and Kimm could probably, I don't know if Kimm, you have any thoughts on this, but from us in particular, because of the purchasing that we do, it can be a challenge, because if, let's say, a book, like a good example is like if they're Genderqueer by Maya, I'm gonna butcher their last name. Is it Kobe or Kobe? Yes, thank you. Okay. So that book in particular, there's been so many reprints of that book, but the problem is right now is, and who owns it is Simon & Schuster, distributes it widely. So the issue is like, once that initial stock goes, now it's Simon & Schuster's job to line it up to another printer in time. And sometimes, currently, because of the ultimately the supply chain issues with that, that's not necessarily happening right now. Now, they obviously get to prioritize what goes first and what doesn't. And that's another scary aspect of kind of how publishing is working right now. So for example, if there's like a person that, has a book published or wants to have a book published, and let's say they're part of that big publisher, but maybe they're only printing like maybe 25,000 copies, which is kind of small, then they may not necessarily get prioritized as the author that's doing 100,000 copies or 1 million copies. And that's the part that's concerning, because that means that book is not, like, especially if it's something that we should be having on our shelves, like from a queer bookstore perspective, that's now getting back ordered or back placed for months on end. I've seen books that have taken a year when they should have been out like 6 months ago or like a year ago. So that's kind of the stuff that we're seeing. And then from a Canadian perspective, things are taking longer, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's any issues of us getting them. It's just a question of, again, being able to have enough copies printed that can then be dispersed by the number of bookstores, because you do have other indies that are interested in buying this material as well, which is great. They should be stocking this, but it comes down to the fact of like what the publisher, whether they're small or large, what they're committing to for a print run and how they go from there. That's a very long explanation and a very winded explanation, but that's kind of the cycle that's kind of going on right now. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
All right, do we have any other audience questions? I have a question, but I want to make sure that if folks do want to ask anything, they have the opportunity. And if you don't want to turn your camera, please feel free to use the chat. I will read your question out loud. But my question is, part historical context and part sort of current. I've always understood sort of queer bookstores to be a community space. And I wanted to know, how are you dealing with that in this COVID context where we are getting back out there into the world, but it's not the way that it was pre-COVID, and it's never going to be quite like that. So what are the ways that you're connecting with community? What's changed for you? And what do you think is next?
I would just say this is less bookstore related, but so I shifted my work to focus more on direct work with LGBTQ young people. And during the pandemic, that obviously brought up a lot of challenges for their and our mental health, and not being able to access queer and trans social spaces because they were at home. And so having to join virtual spaces and be muted and not on camera and all of that, but still being able to connect with their peers. And one of the things that we started doing was creating a book club for young people, and Christina has helped us supply the books for that. So we've read King and the Dragonflies and Pet, and Cemetery Boys is the next choice. So lots of amazing young adult fiction that highlights a lot of really important themes. So that's been a really helpful way to connect with young people.
So for us at All She Wrote Books, we actually held off on doing any events up until really the end of 2021 was the first time we actually attempted to host any events. And the ones that we did, we literally separated people out in chairs. Everyone had to be masked, including the presenters. And so we had done that twice, and then Omicron kind of reared its head and we had to stop. But since then, going into 2022, like Kimm has said, we partner with organizations like the one that they work with to kind of help with their virtual aspects. And that's something we've been doing also with the Simmons University with their Simmons Leadership Conference. This is the second year that we did that. That was pure virtual. So we were their virtual bookstore, which was special and fun, but different, right? Because you're not able to necessarily talk about the books like you would in person, right? But it worked. And so that's like, another example of adapting to that. But since then, we've in 2022 have really marched forward, but as safely as possible. So everyone is still masked in the store no matter what. That's for events and that's for browsing. We did at one point supply masks for folks that forgot, but unfortunately people abused that. And so we had to stop doing that more recently, which stinks. But we may bring that back just because people are it's just not working. So, but we've hosted comedy nights here. We've, Pride is coming up. So we have a couple of events going on with that, including an adult queer story time, which is an opportunity for folks in the queer community to come and share their stories verbally with others in the queer community. This is something we actually piloted last year, and it was successful. We did it both in June and October for both LGBTQ History Month and Pride. So we're hoping to bring that back again and just kind of create that space for like community and connection. We're finally putting in seating into our space. That is not something like seating in the sense of like, you can go sit with a book here in the store because we didn't have that starting off too. So we now have a dedicated section in the front of the store where we'll actually have 2 chairs and a beautiful couch that was donated by a customer, which was super sweet. That will be like a little section for folks to come and gather as well in a smaller setting. So it's definitely shifted things. And it's also disappointing because we weren't necessarily able to host like authors that had books that came out over the last 2 years. But I think that we have to march forward, but we do that as safely as possible. So I'll end there.
All right, do you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. I guess we, as soon as COVID hit, we had hosted obviously a lot of our pop-ups and Black Feminist Study Hall. I think our first 1 or 2 were in person, and obviously like some other things like the Toni Morrison tribute. And we kind of immediately shifted to being solely online and doing a lot of the Black Feminist Study Halls online. Because this is a passion project of ours, we really didn't have an infrastructure set in place to really sell books online. We did sell books through like our Instagram. So literally like posting books on Instagram, people messaging us that they wanted them, and then us sending that to them, which is kind of still how we do things. But yeah, we just immediately shifted to being online. We understand that a lot of the folks in our community also have underlying conditions. I myself have a lot of underlying conditions that made it unsafe for us to kind of host things in person. And our studio space, we had been opening on Sundays for folks to come in and look at all the books that we had in stock. And unfortunately, we had to stop doing that. And honestly, I think one of the biggest things that I love about how we run Print Ain't Dead, Cierra and I, is that because this is a project that it's our love story, I think, to this type of work. And so because it is that, you know, we take time off when we need to. And COVID got really crazy. I caught COVID, I was really sick. We both were super busy working multiple jobs, doing multiple projects, and we actually kind of took the last year off. We haven't done anything in about a year to really just kind of get ourselves right and to recenter ourselves, because that's really kind of the only way that we can do this work without getting burnt out, and without kind of placing ourselves in a position where we feel like we may not want to do it anymore. And again, like the History Project, Cierra and I do not get paid for doing this. We don't make any money, basically. We don't make any money selling used books for $2 to $10. Like, it's not a profit generating model. And so we also like to keep that in mind, is that we're not doing this for profit. And so we really have to make sure that we slow down and take time off when we know that we need to.
Yeah, 100%. And I think just thinking about like queer futures, Black queer futures, I'm always really enamored, and like a lot of my early queer awakening was actually on the internet. And so what I hope comes back is like, I hope that we get message boards. I hope that we get chat rooms. I actually hope that we can like go back to the proto-internet days, because I think that a lot of that is kind of how relations formed for me, at least. And so I don't know, I think that we kind of underestimate the power of the browser sometimes. And, you know, I know that everybody is like super interested in getting to be in person again. And that's, you know, super helpful and generative. But I think that there is something beautiful about being connected to people who are like in Germany, in South Africa, the way that Ari and I got to be over the, you know, lockdown period, early stages of the pandemic, when we were just kind of working together to put on these Black feminist study halls just so people could feel, you know, connected, activated. I think that there's something to that kind of revolution, that like networked radical alternative.
Thank you. There's like, oh, go ahead.
No, I just also want to say really quickly, as someone who also you know, considers themselves to be disabled, I think it's really important that we continue to take into account the power of being virtual and how much that opens that up to folks who may not be able to physically access a bookstore. You know what I mean? To folks who cannot go into public spaces because they're incredibly scared for their health, or maybe folks who have anxiety or other conditions that prevent them from meeting in person with people. Virtual spaces are so important, and I just hope that we continue to devote as much time and resource to that as we do to going back to in-person stuff.
Thank you. And I was gonna say there's like a Tumblr revolution going on right now. A bunch of people are reading Dracula like chapter by chapter every day. And it's like a whole lot of young queer people reading Dracula through a queer lens on Tumblr with each other as like a big global community. And it's kind of amazing to watch it unfold. Because we had a lecture last October where a historian came in and talked about the queerness of Dracula. And even she was on Twitter like, I did it in the wrong year. I should have saved that. Now's the time. But, you know, that's something that the History Project and our events committee has been thinking about is how do we've had such an opportunity to connect with people in their homes and to be able to see people who no longer live in Boston or can't get into the city. It was cold and crummy weather tonight. So like, who wants to go and stay out later? And also I get to meet everyone's dogs and cats and partners. And like, it's really amazing. And how do we maintain that so that we can still have this sense of community together is something that we're trying to figure out too. So looking at the time, I told everyone this would be an hour and a half. So I want to wrap us up first by saying thank you so much to all of our panelists and to our audience. This has been fantastic. I have had a lovely time hearing from all of you, and there have been really wonderful comments in the chat and lots of hearts on the screen. And so thank you so much for taking the time. Before we leave, does anyone have anything they want to plug that's going on? I will say the History Project, I mentioned we have 2 upcoming events, book club next week, and then a Pride conversation. We will also be in person at Youth Pride on Saturday, at Trans Pride on City Hall Plaza on June 4th, at Dyke March on June 10th on Boston Common, and at Trans Resistance on June 25th in Franklin Park. And it looks like right now I will be at the table at all 4 of those. So if you want to come say hi, I will be there. But yeah, Kimm, Christina, Arielle, Cierra, anything you'd like to plug for us?
I was going to plug all those same events. So no, thank you.
I have those events as well in our calendars. I do also have 2 others. We are hosting our first drag queen story hour on June 11th at 10 a.m. at the Bookstore. So if you have little ones in your life that would be interested, we have Miss Bella Luna. I'm really excited to have them come and read the new book from Little Hot Mess, which I'm really jazzed about. If you don't know about that yet, I forget the title. It's it just came out this past week. I'm spacing on it. We also are next Thursday hosting the First Lady of Iceland, Eliza Reid, who had published a book, Secrets of the Sparkar, which is a compilation of stories from women and queer folks in Iceland who have been working on gender parity and gender equality policies throughout Iceland. And it's just a love letter to those women and to the folks who identify as women, as well as queer folks, for the work that they've done. So she is on tour, and this is her Boston stop. It will be at the Somerville Theater next Thursday at 7 p.m. Tickets are still available. So if you are interested in coming, we'd love to have you. It is going to be an intimate setting, but everyone, we're asking folks to mask up for it as well. And yeah, if you want to check out our website, we have more events listed there.
Excellent. And Arielle, Cierra, you folks, I'm trying not to use guys and then I get back into a group of people and I'm like, hey guys. Anyway, do you have anything you want to plug, or should we just all follow you on social media?
Yeah, I was just going to say you can follow us online, printaintdead.us, or at print.ain't.dead. I always get that tripped up. On social media, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. And watch this space, I suppose. We don't have anything currently planned, but you can find us in these streets for now. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Thank you everyone for being here with us tonight. I hope you have a lovely evening, and we will hopefully see you again soon. Bye.